TraumaLink is a Bangladeshi emergency first aid system that harnesses the power of local communities to offer free, crash site care to traffic injury victims. Currently, there is no national emergency hotline system and no affordable or effective emergency response service. Even when victims can find a private ambulance, they're difficult to afford, and the ambulance staff often don't have any medical equipment or training. These barriers increase the time it takes for patients to receive effective treatment. Sadly, many injured victims die because of the many delays in getting them the care they need. TraumaLink solves these issues by providing high-quality medical care at the crash scene. Let's see how this works. There's a crash. A local community member calls TraumaLink's hotline with their mobile phone. TraumaLink's operators collect information about the location of the crash and the number of injured patients. Our system then automatically sends out SMS messages to trained volunteers who are closest to the crash scene. The volunteers respond with an SMS to tell us they're on their way. Volunteers arrive quickly with appropriate medical supplies and provide basic trauma first aid at the crash scene. Call center agents guide the victims to the nearest appropriate medical facility. Because they live and work in the area, our volunteers can arrive on foot within 5 minutes or less. Additionally, they have received training and first aid equipment designed and approved by qualified physicians from Bangladesh and the United States. All of these steps reduce the amount of time it takes for patients to get desperately needed medical care and helps them return to long, happy, and productive lives.
This is the TraumaLink project, a winner of the 2018 foundation. Now, how many accidents did you work on ever since TraumaLink happened?
Alors, mettez bien, voilà, bien le micro contre la bouche. Voilà.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we started TraumaLink. I mean, we've been designing the service for about 2 years, and then before we launched it formally, and then it started scaling up. So I think over the last 2 years, we've encountered, I mean, we've basically addressed more than 500 cases. I mean, John
almost 600.
Almost 600 cases, yeah. And then there have been multiple victims in each of those incidents. Yeah.
Quels sont un nombre de...
Okay, this is quite a lot of accidents. What is your first return of experience? Your idea to say we'll get there very quickly with trained volunteers, does that really work?
So I think, I mean, as I was saying, I mean, the first 2 years we're essentially trying to model this, that, whether it actually works or not, because it was a concept, and the concept was essentially designed on the basis of the fact that in Bangladesh you have a lot of these well-meaning rural youth who do not have a lot of employment. I mean, who are, doing, I mean, they're working at shops or they're, kind of floating around, and they're looking for meaningful things to do. And we knew that was a very unique thing in the case of Bangladesh, as in the case of many developing countries. So I essentially wanted to develop a model that would be sustainable. I mean, if we get grant money and, develop a project just for a little while that grant funding lasts, I mean, we would not be able to make something like this sustainable. So, I mean, our initial challenge was, how do we create a body of volunteers who will do this without being paid for the social good of it. So that was the initial experimentation that we started with. And we found, in the first 2 years, we found very good results. I mean, we actually involved the community members to find out. So, I mean, the screening process is actually very elaborate, where we involve local community members to find out, which are the volunteers who will actually take this response. I mean, who have a history of responding to these kinds of crashes already, who have a personal passion, who have a family history, perhaps, of somebody dying in a road crash. So we essentially selected those kinds of people who have this personal passion and commitment. And then we essentially tried it out in limited areas in the first 2 years, and we got very, very good results. And then actually, when we started scaling out, I mean, we saw that the response rate was that, about 5 to 7 minutes of response in almost every case. And then also, I mean, we were selecting spots which were close to population density areas. Yeah.
C'est juste incroyable.
This is incredible. For you, John, you're an emergency doctor, now how did you develop and even design the training of these volunteers?
Great challenge for us was trying to distill down all of trauma care into a curriculum that could be understandable for people even with no medical training or even limited literacy. So a lot of work went into it at the front end, but we focused on very basic principles, skills that are easy to teach, learn, perform, but also proven to be life-saving.
Est-ce que on a vraiment
Do you really have volunteers capable of having a medical gesture, a medical action?
Yeah, much of basic trauma first aid is essentially mechanics. So it's something that's very accessible to anybody. You see a bleeding wound, you put pressure on it. You keep the spine nice and straight when you're moving somebody so you don't paralyze them. So we actually have many volunteers that are completely illiterate, but they're able to learn these skills, perform them, and they're saving lives in the process and becoming incredibly empowered in doing so.
Et c'est vous-même d'ailleurs qui avez enregistré.
And you have prepared a lot of videos where you can put the people in the right position, put pressure on a wound. How do you...
Vous avez participé quelque part physiquement à cette formation?
Yes, yes. And we thought that because we didn't have any limitations on literacy, we wanted to make the training materials as accessible as possible. So we've developed this training video in Bengali, both in a high definition format, but then also in a format that you can download onto a mobile phone. So our first responders are able to review those skills if they're stuck in traffic, sitting on a bus, or if they have a few extra minutes in the evening.
Mridul, je suis assez fasciné par...
Well, I am amazed, not only in terms of technological innovation. Okay, you send a text message, you have geolocalization, so we use a lot of technology. But what is great is this social innovation that you've been able to create. And I'm very much surprised to see how you started from scratch. In fact, the idea to say, okay, we're going to train volunteer people who are going to come on, in case of a car crash. Okay, that's a basic idea. It's basic as ABC. But in reality, you are training volunteers who are really going to act on major accidents, remove them from cars. They can be shocked. They can be in front of, dead people, and that could shock people. That could be shocking. You know, normally these are scenes that are only made available to professionals. So you're in fact giving this, making this available to people from society. Could be very violent from a psychological point of view.
I mean, it could be. I mean, I think it's very, I mean, both psychologically taxing sometimes for volunteers, and it's also very self-fulfilling. I mean, the trainings that we go through kind of go through these kinds of issues that, you know, they may be faced with a very traumatic situation at the incident site. They may be faced with people who are in a state of panic. So it's not just the medical skills that we train them on. It's also the social skills of managing this kind of a situation. And in Bangladesh, I mean, with a very highly populated country, I mean, road accidents on the highways is actually a very, very common phenomenon, unfortunately.
Comment est-ce que vous accompagnez
How do you support these volunteers in terms of training? Is it only through videos available on the web? And then post-trauma? Do you have physical meetings? I mean, do you meet them after on a regular basis?
Yes, I mean, John can possibly elaborate on that process.
Yes. So we do in-person training. They get their initial training from a Bangladeshi physician trainer. The curriculum is in Bengali. But to get back to your last point, we early on recognized that this is, you know, this type of work is potentially very difficult for people. I know that as an emergency physician myself, and I also know that first responders tend to benefit most from being able to communicate their experiences with other first responders. So we've really encouraged our volunteers and our local field staff to have regular meetings, basically to talk about their experiences. And my last visit to Bangladesh in February, I was talking with one of our local field staff, and he was telling me how it's not unusual for him to spend 2-3 hours with a volunteer who's just had a very difficult experience, just to talk that through with them and provide support and share experiences, and we're finding that very helpful.
Toute dernière question, John, avant de laisser la parole à
Well, one last question to you, John, before handing it over to the audience. What is your perception as a Westerner, an American? What is your opinion on what is happening in Bangladesh thanks to TraumaLink? In rich countries, emergency, it's only for professionals. You can't call anyone. You need to call the hospital. You need to call the ambulance. It's not just for everyone. And here, you're really doing the exact opposite. Do you think that this could be possible in the US or even in France or in Europe? It's really only for the poor countries.
Well, I think it's been a remarkable experience for me just seeing the incredible amount of goodwill among Bangladeshis, and the motivations for carrying out this sort of service were already in place. We just had to provide some guidance, some education, some equipment. I think that as a Westerner, I recognize similar problems in my country, especially in rural areas, and I have certainly wondered if a similar type of model might be relevant in the U.S. as well. Hopefully so.